Thank you. Now we are. Thank you, sir, and appreciate the opportunity to be here as always and speak to you briefly about factors that influence the submittal of annexation petitions. And I'll begin with statutory limitations. Basically, three I'd like to touch upon. Don't commit it to memory. We're happy to provide you this information at any time. Annexations cannot occur outside of a 3-mile bubble from your primary borders. Our water lines extend beyond that point. Our water plant is beyond that point. There is a possibility that we have a water request that is outside the 3-mile bubble and will not be eligible for annexation. Another statutory limitation is it cannot be any closer to another municipality. We have an annexation agreement with the town of Woodfin, as you're all aware. It is incredibly unlikely that we would encounter that with the city of Asheville, who we do not have an annexation agreement with, but that is another factor that could influence the submittal of the petition. And then lastly, there is a 10% cap on satellite annexations. What I mean by that is, you know, the islands that are on our zoning maps, our municipal maps, those are satellite annexations, again, capped at 10%. Right now, we're at 1 and change. You can anticipate a scenario, especially if we travel out the new water line out all the Weaver and Clark Chapel, that we're likely to encounter some annexation petitions that will be satellite in nature. May not be tomorrow or in 20 years, but at some point, it's possible that the town will encounter that 10% threshold. So those are your statutory limitations. I don't believe I've left any out, Jennifer. Very good. I'd also like to speak about practically how these annexation petitions come about. The vast majority, if not all of them, are driven by utility provision. And for us, utility provision is specifically water. All of the annexation that this town has done since the loss of involuntary annexation has been a result of water allocations. There's one in the previous 10 years that I'm familiar with. There was an annexation out of good faith and really not asking for any services whatsoever. Every other annexation has been driven by water. We can also anticipate at some point, if we reach the capacity of our water system, whatever that may be, that carrot, if you will, has the potential to go away. And if that's the case, it was my direct experience with my previous employer. After the loss of involuntary annexation, the really the only avenue that the municipality has to pursue to entice people to voluntarily annex their properties is the lightening of your land use regulations. You have to allow people to do more with their property than the neighboring jurisdictions will allow. It's the only other mechanism that I've seen in 15 years that will entice a property owner to voluntarily annex their property into town. So again, utility provision in the way of water. If that goes away, the only other mechanism that I'm familiar with that the town will have is to lessen its land use regulations to allow a property owner to do more with their property than would otherwise be allowed with other jurisdictions.
James, question.
Sorry.
Looking at the future, if someone wanted to expand to the north of us, the procedure be to get the agreement with whatever they have to make with the sewage from the county before we moved in, they moved to us, or how does that work sequence-wise? They're gonna have to have pumping stations, you know.
So let me begin with a statement that we all understand that MSD is a separate entity. They have their own policies and procedures, so on and so forth. It's my belief and understanding, and I'm looking over the podium at our MSD representative, Mr. Dirth, who is with us this evening, that they have a system largely similar to us in water in that it's paid for on the private side. It's then accepted into the public system. And if pump stations would be required, then that would be largely, if not entirely, upon the property owner or whoever it is that's developing the project. Going back to some of the conversation in our workshop from a few months ago, North Windy Ridge is largely the northern terminus of the public sewage system in Buncombe County. Also, as an
Say that
indication,
again, can you say that sentence again? North Windy Ridge is largely the.
terminus of the public sewer system in
Okay.
Vulcan County. Going back just a moment, I've got it up on the screen here, I think, hopefully, as an indication of, that's weird. My screen is not showing up on the big screen, so I'll try to describe it as an indication of a 3-mile bubble. It's almost from,
Stop sharing and then restart.
okay, let's try that. All right. Pardon me while I travel. As the crow flies, the fire department is right here. We go just barely north of the fire department with our municipal limits. 3-mile straight line is just south of Jupiter Road up off 526. Anything north of that, we can't touch unless our primary municipal borders also move to the north and therefore extending that bubble. The water plant off Sam's Road is off the page approximately here. So as you can deduce, there's plenty of line between those 2 points.
But there's not much incentive for a developer to go north of Windy Ridge for anything of scale, right?
I would say that with the loss of the public sewer system, the type of development that will be experienced will be much less intensive in nature, is how I would answer that question. Without, of course, some very large project that could fund fairly large infrastructure improvements on the private side and then injected into the public system.
I might add, in that regard.
Can you come to the podium?
Right.
Podium.
MSD is in the process of updating their sort of master plan. And there's a set of graphics and so forth that I've been meaning to get to you, but I'm sorry I haven't. But anyway, it envisions growth in the future. We're not talking about next year, you know, that kind of thing. But long range up to the Madison County border, and then significant area growth in the southwest as well. I'll give those to you. Thank you.
Any other questions for the planning director?
If I may briefly, I promise, before we leave the topic, as it relates to utility provision, we need to be mindful of areas, of our growth areas where a developer or a property owner could seek those utilities from a different provider.
Any other questions for Mr. Eller? Thank you, James. Attorney Jackson, would you give us a little overview of the proposed resolution?
I will. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I wanted to say that Vice Mayor McKenna actually asked a really important question at the conclusion of the town council's meeting last month, which was, is staff communicating in general? Is staff communicating what town council wants in terms of development to developers? In other words, are we telling developers what it is that town council wants to see? And this actually is really a difficult question to answer. It's really important but difficult for these reasons. We have to tell developers what a reflection, we have to reflect what town council action is, your votes, and not individual council members' discussions. And so we have to lean back on town council action to really do that. The last action that town council took as far as really addressing these issues, which are how to deal with growth, annexation, and water requests, was back in late 2018 and early 2019 when we were considering your strategic plan. And one of the very first objectives on that plan was to talk about annexation. Do we want an annexation policy? How are we going to deal with water requests and annexation? And at that point, it was decided to just approach this on a case-by-case basis, which doesn't really give a lot of teeth to anything that we might be able to tell developers. However, you have very typically only provided water, granted water requests if the developer is willing to annex in. That's been a very consistent practice that you've had, not necessarily a policy. And I believe that James actually has been indicating to developers that, yes, don't be surprised if town council requests that you annex in as a condition of water. So that's been a pretty consistent practice. What's called that into question, though, is the Pleasant Grove Townhouse project that you considered back in April and May, and made a decision in May to go ahead and grant the water for that project, which is Reams Creek Road and Pleasant Grove Road, without any discussion at all about annexation. And so the practice had been, if you want water, you're going to need to annex in. Well, all of a sudden, this particular project, there wasn't any discussion about annexation.
That's not true, because I asked the question.
But you didn't tie it to,
No.
didn't tie it to.
As a group.
Right, and I think the reason for that was because it wasn't contiguous, even though we're still well below our 10%. I think that was the deciding, the factor that made the decision not to ask for annexation because it wasn't contiguous. But, and I'm sorry for interrupting so much, but if the project that we have now before us, which is, I forget the name of it, but the 160 some townhomes, if that comes into town, then this property will be, this property that Jennifer's referring to would be contiguous. And I think we should probably go back to them and say, maybe you should consider asking for annexation.
So
Sorry to interrupt.
yeah, so anyway, we've had a difficulty in really detailing out what town council's policy is. So right now, we don't really know what to tell developers, but we're happy to do so if there's some agreement. And so what I did with that in mind, I have, you've got it. Actually, let me share mine, because if we tweak on the fly, I want to make sure that I got it up.
Well, I guess if I would have, I was remiss if not, and I didn't think that we could ask for annexation with it not being contiguous, because when I asked the question about them voluntarily annexing, and then I was told no, and then I asked if it was, I would have definitely recommended that they do that, if I'd have known that I could have, but I guess.
Yeah, and if we have some way of maybe going back and correcting that, if you will, maybe it's the wrong term, but we've talked a good bit about this, and I think the pros and cons of having a strategy where you're proactive and consistent is you're predictable, saves time for everybody. And over time, we can get pretty good at applying principles. The idea of taking each one as they come, you get flexibility, but I don't know about you, I'm not smart enough to figure out this one we should talk about annexing or not. I'd rather take some principles and apply it to everybody. And particularly around this, ring outside the town. So I think this is a good approach to take, and plus it allows you to communicate it in the media too, if we want to do that, or on the website. So there's no uncertainty. This is what these guys are trying to do.
So again, with all of that in mind, trying to figure out the best way to communicate what town council's wishes are in this, with the mayor and Selena's assistance, we've come up with a draft resolution that we want to go through. And it does just a few things. It incorporates some of that land use consensus language that came out of the workshop that was in your packet, the highlighted areas, and those are reflected in here. It declares generally a desire to annex properties within your 5 growth areas. we've got maps we can put up if we need to, but I think everybody's pretty familiar with the growth areas that we talked about at your May workshop. It also declares a desire, this is Andrew's issue, and I wish you were here to hear it, but it also declares a desire to approve water requests with annexation. I'm not sure that he and I are seeing things exactly the same way on that. And as far as timing is concerned, to me, it doesn't really matter whether you grant a water request conditioned upon annexation or you annex and then grant water, the result is the same. It's still 2 votes of council. He, I think, has a preference for annex in, and then we'll get you water. But either way, I think there has been a pretty consistent desire by council to link those two.
Oh, we're required, if they're part of the town, to give them water. So if they annex, it's not a question if we or not.
And that's his point.
That's
That's
his
his
point.
point.
Yeah.
Right.
But that's exactly right. But there still are 2 votes that you have to, with these big developments, there are 2 votes.
No matter how you cut it, it's still 2 votes.
You have to, for instance, if the meter size is over 2 inches, 2 inches or high or bigger, the vote has to be by town council. If it's extending the water system by adding water mains to the system, that's a vote you have to decide to take. And again, it's whether you do one versus the other first. It's not really, the outcome is the same, typically. The other thing it does, and this is where we really need some guidance from town council, is that it does enumerate some desired land uses within each of those growth areas. And we did at the May meeting, there was some fairly good conversation specifically about growth area 1 and growth area 2, perhaps growth area 3. But that was a meeting where we kind of got, I'm going to say stuck. I don't really mean that, but we got really focused on growth area 1 in that meeting. And so there were others that we need to really, we need to hear some conversation from you as far as that is concerned. So kind of flipping through the resolution, the first page is a bunch of whereas clauses that kind of go through a lot of what we just talked about. Down in the sort of the substance of it, number 1, it just identifies those areas and it would have maps associated with or showing these growth areas attached to the resolution. The second paragraph talks about it being the town is likely to favorably consider voluntary annexations. Understand, I'm not trying to box you into anything. I don't want to take away the discretion that town council by law has. But this is a way to kind of signal to developers and the public and staff, frankly, what your baseline is, what your expectation is. And so it is that you would favorably consider annexation of the properties, perhaps with the exception of growth area 3, which does extend out in an area, at least right now, that is probably beyond, perhaps beyond where we could legally provide some. No, I think what I'm thinking there is that's an area where there is currently not public sewer.
Right.
Correct.
And so there's a growth potential of some kind of isolated large lots that will probably be developed as single family residential lots. And does it make sense to annex that area if Dale's folks have to drive two miles out to pick up the garbage in that area? Is that isolated subdivision, is that the best idea to bring that in as a satellite or leave it out? I mean,
Well, one of the things that I see happening is Clark's Chapel Road, we're beginning to get a lot of little small developments there, and they are asking for water, right? Didn't we just approve something down Clark's Chapel?
I think there was a small,
Or was that 9 or?
6 months ago, it's a 9, 10 lot subdivision.
Yeah, and so I think that's gonna continue to happen. Because I hear a lot of chatter going on amongst some GCs that I work with. So again, I think with Andrew's point of annexation with water, the words that keep coming is something you've got here. It's like the tax base that's gonna support the economic stability of the town's services. If you're only 2 miles from town and you're not paying town taxes, you're still getting all the services, except for maybe Dale's people picking up your garbage.
Right.
But you're getting police, you're getting fire, you're getting the water. So I kind of understand why, I understand more now than ever before in my life, why people need to be annexed into town.
and this absolutely provides you the opportunity to do that. It just does recognize there may be some circumstances that don't make sense.
Right.
So,
Yeah, you're not locked into anything. It also sends a signal that we're thinking strategically, and there might be some people that are looking at land use plans for a whole large region. They say, wow, you guys are really taking the time. Let's sit down and map out a bigger strategy other than 1 or 2 developments. The other thing is, remember, a lot of this isn't a new idea. This is what they came up with when we built the water plant. That was, if you go back and read that document we sent around, that was their whole idea, is it's a tool to influence development. Not necessarily control it, but influence it.
And I think it's important to remember that this resolution doesn't commit us to anything. It doesn't make any decisions about any particular projects. What it does do, though, is give the staff messaging that they can relay to developers and others about what the general intent of the council is. Are there any other questions for Jennifer on this issue?
Is there any more clarity on the Department of Agriculture, where if we had a line system that came close to it, we were obligated to give them water?
I mean, yeah,
Because-
the answer to that is if you have capacity in your system and you can legally serve it, legally and from an engineering standpoint serve, then they're probably going to expect that you will provide them water. And that is not just on the line that was built with the USDA funds, the line.
Whole system.
It's the whole system. Because again, the security on that loan is it's a revenue-based security. So, and that revenue is system-wide, not just line, not one particular line. Because of that, if you do propose to turn some water down for some reason other than, look, we're out of capacity, or our engineer says that it's not possible for us to serve this without jeopardizing the rest of our system. If it's for some other reason, then you're gonna have to get concurrence from USDA in any event, but they're probably not gonna look very favorably on those.
So a developer could obviously put up a development and get the water and we don't have to annex if he didn't want to pay the taxes on the development.
Yes,
It might take-
Conceivably.
have to work through it.
yeah, they would have to work through, because what it does is the process on that is, say you're proposing to deny a water request. That intent to deny a request has to go to USDA. They will review that and either offer a concurrence that says, yes, Town of Weaverville, you can deny water on this project, or it will release that developer, say USDA says, we don't agree with that, developer, you now have a legal action that you can bring against the town in order to seek to get that water. Those are the options on that procedure. But yes, it is the whole system. Number 3, again, I'll go through this pretty quickly because I want to get to the meat of what we would like to discuss with council. Number 3 just goes through sort of some admittedly pie in the sky kind of things that you would like to encourage developers to think about and include within their development. And then number 4 begins, and there's a paragraph for each of the growth areas. And what this does is it allows you to look at the uses that you really want to see within those growth areas and then tie them to the zoning districts that are most in line with those uses. This paragraph number 4 is growth area 1. I felt like there was good conversation about all of these. This is the Gill Branch Valley. It's a large area. I think there was a pretty consistent idea that a mixed-use development, single-family residences, duplexes, townhouses, multifamily, and some commercial that would kind of support those neighborhoods and communities are best within that area. We didn't really talk about the commercial development and what that means, and I assume that that's really small general retail, restaurants, professional services, those type of things. But if there's any clarification to any of that, I would welcome that.
I think we just want developers to know that including that type of commercial development in residential areas benefits the new residents and also keeps those people from having to drive downtown for everything, so. I think that's the message we want to convey.
Are we all pretty good with those? All right, so the next one is paragraph 5 talks about growth area 2. There's not a huge amount of property within this area. This is Monticello Road. This is where LDG, the proposed LDG project is. It's also some of the other, I guess that parcel between the proposed LDG and
The retreats.
Hawthorne, and then perhaps some properties towards the back of that. I think is what was and what I have, it's essentially the same thing, except it does not have multifamily. I took multifamily out of that because I think there is a feeling that we might be getting too saturated with that. Especially with the LDG project, if that goes forward.
Yeah, that sends a good message that we've been listening to, that, you know, people, the public has that sense of that area too, so.
So we.
Everybody good with area 2? Okay. Number 3?
All right, number 3 is across the street. That's the Ollie Weaver Road area. And we really, what I've sort of picked up on is not necessarily conversations that were had in the workshops, but really as you were discussing the Ollie Weaver project. I can't remember the numbers. Behind the CVS, as you were talking about that, listening to input from that area, it seemed like maybe single-family residences and duplexes in that area is more of and then supporting commercial development is more what you were thinking. But again, this is my language. It needs to be yours, so I don't want you to feel tied to what I've got in here.
What I was thinking is a copy paste, because we did have it on 1 and 2, and I was thinking maybe just copy paste. And there's 2 huge areas. One, the lady who Michelle knows and talked to many times that just sold her farm because we approved Ollie Weaver, so she had to shut down her Airbnb and that just destroyed her life. What is her name? We ran into her at Yellow Mug. But anyway, she lives right next to Ollie Weaver, and she lives on Ollie Weaver, right next to what we just approved. The other big lot, it's a big farm that she had there.
Yes, I don't know who had a farm, she had a house there.
But it was a big area. She called it a farm. It was like 8 or 10 acres, I think. But the other thing that's big there is the concrete plant. And so there's a possibility of 2 big lots on both sides, one on both sides of this Ollie Weaver apartment that we just approved. So it could come in as single family, subdivision, could come in as townhomes, could come in as a whole little mall.
As a what?
A mall, like a retail,
just a point of clarification, not without significant improvements to the sewer system, which as of now comes to a terminus at CVS and will be extended slightly to that Ollie Weaver project. Past that point, we have again left the sewer system.
Would the sewer system be able to be in the front part there where the concrete's at? You don't know.
I haven't seen any plans for Ollie Weaver yet, so I'm not sure how they intend on extending the system at least that far. I'd rather tell you I don't know, point us in the wrong direction.
So if we added mixed-use development, single-family residential, duplexes, townhouses, do you want to include that there? And then commercial development? And then,
Well, is just maybe a question, are we trying to differentiate some of these from each other to where this area has character that's slightly different than this? Because that would be the argument against just cutting and pasting.
Yes,
Otherwise, we don't need all these different descriptions, right?
right. Well, that's, to answer your question, I think that, well, that's why you don't see multifamily units in this particular one as opposed to
Right.
where you saw them in Monticello, because it's, this area is not going to easily support multifamily development as Monticello would. So that's why it's different than one, right?
yeah, so one had multifamily in it.
Right.
Growth area 2 did not.
That's right.
Growth area
Three does
3, the
not.
question is, I mean, the way I had it written, I had just single-family residential, duplexes, and commercial development. Ms. Cordell made a proposition that we are copying some of what was in growth area 2 back down to growth area 3, which would include mixed-use development and townhouses. Those are the two differences there.
Well, I was just thinking, because there's the two big lots that, you know, we might need to be open to it. But if James says there's no sewer, then you can't be open to it. But if, I don't know, it's two big, land areas on both sides of it. I don't know how long the concrete plant will be there, but if somebody came along and offered him the right amount of money, he might be gone tomorrow.
Are you thinking commercial or are you thinking multifamily?
I'm thinking commercial because it's right beside of the highway and it's a good interchange for trucks to get in and out of.
So commercial development is listed. We do have, especially those supporting residential neighborhoods, but that's kind of a focus, but not a requirement.
And if we get a year down the road, and we could always revisit the resolution, right? It could be a living,
Sure.
breathing.
Sure.
We have to approve it, but so as you see more clarity up there, we could always go back and, I mean, I think this is a good starting point.
Oh, yeah.
It sets
Right.
a tone.
And it could be that, it could be that if sewer gets extended there, then we might want to go back and revisit
Right.
this. But at this point, this represents what we know today.
So is the consensus to leave it as it was, which was just single family duplexes and commercial development, or do you want to add in the mixed use development and townhouses?
Anyone have a preference?
I kind of like where it is now as a starting point, but that's just me. I don't want to, I'd rather not water it down and say, well, what about this? Let's throw that in, because then we're kind of then back to where we started from.
So would we have to use any kind of an explanation, what we just leave C as commercial development?
I mean, if you want to, maybe we say especially those supporting residential neighborhoods such as small general retail, restaurants, professional services, and other commercial development consistent with existing.
Or you could just drop a period at neighborhoods. at the end of neighborhoods.
Yes.
Oh, yeah,
Yes. Yes, I think that's simpler.
Yeah.
like that.
Punctuation changes everything.
Does that work for you, Catherine, or?
Just fine,
You
yeah.
good for that? Okay.
All right, going on to paragraph number 7, this is growth area 4. This is your I-26 corridor, and the only thing that we really heard talk about at the May workshop was sort of commercially developing these areas, especially medical services such as healthcare facilities, medical offices, perhaps some large general retail, restaurants, hotels. Again, that's a big list of things, but I think this one to me was pretty, we need some guidance from you on this.
I wish we would never get more large general retail.
I do too.
Yeah, I'd like to take that off. if-
Let's just,
if
I think,
somebody else-
I would be good with taking that out too. I think that's a good point, Catherine.
All right? You want me to just say general retail?
General retail's good, or small retail.
Yeah, small retail is even more descriptive.
Right.
Small general retail. Okay? Restaurants, hotels, that all sounds good?
Everybody good with that? Good, sounds like
Yep.
4 is good.
8, this is the Reeves Creek Road area, and this is a pretty large area. And there was really very little discussion about this, other than obviously it will tend to be more residential in nature. But there was some conversation about having, I'm gonna use the term food desert. There's not much retail out, there's really not any
None.
retail. There's one, I guess, one gas station.
Yeah, there is.
But there's really not a lot of retail out there to support that growing residential area. So I did include that. This goes back to the kind of the fuller list of residential. So your single family residential development, duplexes, townhouses, multifamily, and then that commercial.
If I may, sort of resetting the conversation back to the workshop, let's all keep in mind that this is an area ripe for high-intensity development.
Yep.
Transportation infrastructure, utility infrastructure is already there.
That's
Yeah.
right. It's coming.
Yeah, and when I was sitting on the transportation group before John and now Catherine, and a lot of these projects got pushed out, but they made the comment that in the north part of the county, the Reeves Creek area was an area that was going to be their target as far as that's where the growth is going to want to go. So we want to have that on our radar screen. I mean, the DOT is thinking that way.
I think it also
French
matches one of them, Steve's areas where they anticipate high growth as well.
Yeah, that's on their list.
Right.
That is one area, by the way, that the town and MSD did sort of violate this normal principle of not doing speculative development. The extension out there about 10 years ago kind of was pushing.
Anyone want to suggest any changes to area number 5?
What's not in this is mixed-use development. I'm not sure whether that was an oversight on my part or an intentional omission that I now can't tell you why I omitted.
When in general, I think mixed-use developments are preferable to multifamily developments without mixed use, so.
So this gets the full, this really is echoes your growth area 1.
Right, exactly.
As we would expect.
Right.
That area. I would also add to the comments that we've already had about the Reeves Creek areas that is, as we all know, flows right well with the Greenway. When the renovation happens.
Right.
When it happens.
Any suggested changes for area number 5? Everybody else? If not, I assume people are comfortable with how it's currently worded? Okay, very good.
So paragraph 9 just talks about town is willing to support compatible development in these areas by considering approval of public water requests if there's current or anticipated capacity that's available and approval is in the best interest of the town and the system. So that's in there. And then paragraph 10 talks about the recommended procedure for approvals. It's for property owners to present voluntary annexation petitions either with or prior to water requests and zoning requests. Although with the understanding that there are some deviations that might be proper. And then 11 is just kind of backs us. This gives you all of your outs. This is non-binding. It's meant to be just sort of forecasting for developers, but not binding.
It's our out.
It's your out.
Yeah.
I like the idea of this document being reviewed fairly regularly. In my opinion, this really does serve as an amendment to the comprehensive land use plan. It provides a lot of guidance. As you will remember from a few months ago, the state law now requires a more formal process to amend your plan. And what I would propose is that you go ahead and adopt this if you're ready to do that. And we sort of keep this as an informal update to the comprehensive land use plan, but maybe revisit this every year when you're reviewing your priorities and other matters.
So this kind of effectively becomes our version of a soft ETJ, right? That term that, I don't know who came up with it, the consultant or whatever, but
Yes, that wasn't, he did, yes, it does, but if that wasn't the term he used, I forget what it was.
I don't know where that came from, but it stuck with
Right.
me.
But yes, it does accomplish that.
Even though we don't have an ETJ, we're kind of acting as though there is one. We're being responsible along our border.
Which is a good thing, I think.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, I do too.
One of the things that I think that this could be used really well for is one of the items on your priority list for your comprehensive land use plan is looking at your future land use map. And I think this gives some good information to start building that, really looking at that map, which is for the folks that have sat on the planning board, that future land use map is very critical to some decisions that the planning board has to make on consistency when they're reviewing developments. So I think this will serve that process well.
Well, it probably allows the police and fire and public works to kind of think ahead about scaling their staff and services, because the assumption is that'll be part of Weaverville, not maybe, or depends on how council's feeling on a particular night. So they can kind of look down the road and do some long-range planning.
I think that's true with the statement that we do not have involuntary annexation. Going back to James's comments about how do we entice developers to come to the town. If we've got water, we're in the game. If our regulations are less intensive than the counties, we're in the game. If neither of those are occurring, then the annexation is not likely to happen.
Right.
Are there any other questions? If not, would someone like to make the motion that we accept the proposed resolution?
I'll make that motion.
But we don't need a second. So there is a motion that we accept the proposed resolution with the minor changes that we made tonight in wording. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. Excellent, resolution passes. Good work, folks. That actually concludes our agenda for tonight. We will have our regular council meeting next Monday night, the 19th at 6 p.m. and look forward to seeing you all there. We are adjourned.
Thank you.